Well, hello, friends, and we certainly do hope that you're enjoying the study that we're going through and the sessions that it presents to all of us. Now, we know that over time, questions may come up, observations, and or even statements that you would like to share with us, and we wanted to introduce to you a means by which you can make contact with us, and that is through email at billw@cgi.org. That's billw@cgi.org. We would love to hear from you to help us out as well, because so often, we get into a mindset perhaps and are not aware necessarily of things that are crossing your mind as a result of the material that we may be covering. So don't be shy, don't be bashful, don't hesitate if indeed a question may emerge through the presentations that we share with you, and go ahead and just email us at this billw@cgi.org email address, and we will get them and hopefully over the ensuing weeks be able to address some of them, even perhaps subjects that you would like to see us address. We'd be more than happy to take some of those ideas and maybe build presentations around them. So one more time, billw@cgi.org if you have any questions or statements or observations to make, and we'll look forward to receiving those requests from you. So in the meantime, let's now get back to the study that we're going through. Good to see everyone here. We got a small flock, but that's okay. Make it quaint and intimate. Welcome to all of you there on the internet as well. Looking forward to the Feast of Tabernacles here, making plans just to kind of bring all of you up to date a little bit. We're excited about the feast. It's coming together, and as some of you have been requesting and asking with respect to the schedule and so on, some of the events in that are already posted on the internet, as well as pinned up on the bulletin board downstairs. So if you care to kind of look at what we've got planned, speakers and so on, you can go ahead and review that as you get time. Wanted to also just clarify the fact of some of you may have questions, especially those of you on the internet who may just be tuning in, and or maybe perhaps this is your first time in viewing the Medina, Ohio services, that Ben Faulkner, just to clarify with who is Ben and how we're connected with him, he has been co-coordinating the Feast of Tabernacles down in the St. Pete, Florida area, oh boy, for probably a decade or so with us, the CGI, and the Church of God Miami. That site has over the years been a co-sponsored site with two other organizations, with the CGI pretty much taking the directive role, while the others are coordinating with the administration table and so forth, and song leading and speaking and what have you. Ben has an international prayer ministry that he conducts out of the Tampa Bay, Florida area, his home primarily, and he's kind of a hub. He gets all of these prayer requests from all over the world and all over, crossing organizational lines. And as many of you understand, and I would hope comprehend, that the Church of God is an organism. It's not an organization, and that's why you will hear certain people that are from other organizations requesting prayer from us who are not part of their organization. But that doesn't matter, right? Doesn't matter. It's an organism. It's a spiritual organism, the Church of God. And regardless of those evangelistic initiatives, efforts, organizations that I call basically coordinated efforts to forge God's Word ahead, regardless of those divisions and separations, it doesn't and shouldn't separate us spiritually from praying for others who have sicknesses and illnesses, regardless. So that is why kind of you will hear people from the COG organization or the United organization, maybe even the Living Church of God organization, requesting prayers from us through Ben Faulkner, who's kind of, as I say, this hub for acquiring international information from all over the world of people who have sicknesses that they're dealing with. And appreciated that prayer, Dave. It was a very nice prayer with regards to requesting people for healing, because God does heal, brother. God does heal, and it's something that we shouldn't minimize in any respect, because certainly we know He's active in the lives of individuals. I've seen miracles in my ministry since 1986 when I was ordained, throughout the years in serving people, whereby miracles, sometimes they happen over time, sometimes they happen immediately, overnight. and he does work, but it is his prerogative. That's what we have to keep in mind. It's his prerogative, but that certainly doesn't dismiss our responsibility for keeping the names before God in the sea of glass, requesting individuals relief for whatever they are looking for relief from. So do keep all of these people in mind. Take it serious when you go to your prayer closets and asking God before his throne for these healings that we look forward to so much and so desperately from those that are indeed suffering from these things. Okay, well, with that, I wanted to kind of revisit, and hopefully we'll finish up this presentation on marriage. It's turned into a three-part presentation. And last week, just as a little recap, we went through some things with regards to accesses of marriages and how they sometimes can be thrown off the rails. And these accesses, we went through a listing of chaotic connections, financial strains and stresses, romance and sex, and betrayal in marriage, and different things along those lines. And I'm not going to go into any detail today with regards to that and belabor those points, simply because we have done that in point 2 or part 2, and as a result have, for all intents and purposes, covered that in those areas. So if you want to go ahead and review that, you can get part 2 and review that. It's on the internet for your perusal and consideration. But last week, too, we covered at least 2 of the points that I want to cover. I never tell people how many points I go through, so that way you never know. You never know, is he going to stop now? Is he going You learn that in public speaking, you know. But at any rate, we went through 2 points, and we had the first one, of course, you must be 100% in. Not 50%. You know, people say, well, you're 50-50. No. It's not 50-50. This is 100%, 100%. Or you could say 120 for the excessive expression of that, because you should be all in your marriage, doing all that you can as far as we as individuals in participating in our part and in our half of the agreement and partnership and vow that we are part of with respect to marriage and that connection between a male, just to remind all of us, and a female, because that's what we learned in part 1, did we not? That there are certain prerequisites and, of course, fundamentals that do indeed define a marriage, and if you don't meet that template, you can call it whatever you want to call it. You can call it marriage and think you're married, but guess what? God reserves the prerogative to define what marriage is. And if you don't fall within those parameters, guess what? You don't have a marriage. You don't have a marriage. And so as we understand, marriages are single, one wife, one husband, and of course are heterosexual in their association. But at any rate, point 1 was 100% in, and of course point 2 was, and we covered this to a certain extent, respect your spouses, respect your children if you have children in the marriage. These children are little people. They're people, regardless of how old they may be, or immature they may be, or reckless as they may be, or loudmouthed as they may be, or misbehaving as they, I could go on and on and on. But the point of it is, they're little people. They're little people, and they deserve our respect. They deserve as much respect as you expect from them. And that's why honor your mother, honor your father is the first commandment with promise, because it does generate results. It does generate an effect from a cause that hopefully is being exercised in a respectful way that generates an effect of mutual respect in reciprocation. And that's important. Respect. Respect your wife. Respect your husband. And how you can determine that is, how do you talk to them? What's your tone of voice? What's your attitude toward them? Consider how you sound and what you are exhibiting in terms of your attitude. These are things that we need to self-reflect so that we keep ourselves in check and we do fall within those parameters of respect, because respect is obviously a demand of a certain type of behavior that is in opposition to what we had talked about with regard to conceit. And I want to go back just and revisit this small point in as was embedded in part 2, over here in Philippians chapter 2. And just revisit this real quickly here, because it's important that we keep this in mind as a standard underscore a standard underscore, platform, underline, launching pad for our approach toward respecting one another. And that's in verse 3, chapter 2, book of Philippians. We read this very simply: let nothing be done through strife and vainglory, or self-conceit is also what this Greek word can mean. But in lowliness of mind, look at this now, and this is a challenge. And as we go forward into these next points, this is a premise. It is a protocol by which we should adhere to and keep in mind. And that is, let each esteem other, that is your mate, I need to esteem Margie better than myself. Now that's a challenge for all human beings because we're selfish in our nature. It's about our comfort. It's about our satisfaction. It's about what we want. It's about, generally, oftentimes in our nature, we gravitate toward these selfish proclivities. I don't like it that way. I want it my way. Shut up. You don't have nothing to say about this. We're doing it my way. Sit down. You know, these kinds of things. And it's important that we recognize that no. This is a mutual arrangement. I need to be as concerned and interested as your point of view, as my point of view is. And so I need to listen. I need to be quiet, and I need to listen. What is it that you have? What is it that you want? And try to understand by putting me in their shoes. In my case, Margie's shoes. Her case, my shoes. And try to fit somewhere in between. Try to find this, all right, we'll put, I remember this decision on where we were going to put our bar down in our basement. We were remodeling our basement. And we went round and round like a couple of cats on a hot tin roof. I want it over there, I want it over here. You know? And we went round and round on this thing. And lo and behold, finally, my children arbitrated. They came in and refereed and added some reason to the rationale or irrationale that we were both using, and got the decision made and put it where it is, and it turned out to be the right place. I'll never forget also the time when Margie and I were decorating our building. We were building a brand new building, 7,000 square foot building for our business. And we were decorating the interior, and I wanted this color and she wanted that color. I mean, we were, again, a couple of cats on a hot tin roof running around chasing each other's tail. And finally, I was at a dialysis unit, and they were redoing this dialysis unit, and I found this lady who's an interior decorator, and I hired her. I brought her in to the business, to the building, and she arbitrated the colors and the schemes and so forth, and guess what? My marriage was salvaged. But the point of it is, you have to find some common ground. You have to, and that's the point I'm trying to make, regardless, doing the best you can to find a means by which, even if it is external tools that you might use. Ask your children, especially if they're grown up, what are their opinions? Because guess what? Your children are gifted. Your children are gifted, especially when they start getting, of age to a certain point, and they understand where they are and who they are and who mom and dad is and all, and they become conscious about certain courtesies and considerations in life, and you're teaching them as they're growing up. And as a matter of fact, it's even a good growing opportunity for them, for mom and dad to say, well, Billy, what do you think? Well, I don't have an opinion. What do you mean you don't have an opinion? Have an opinion. What is it? And encourage them to come forward and talk to them like people. Don't ignore them. Bring them into the circle of trust. Bring them into the circle of participation. Bring them in. Don't just dictate to them. Don't just sit down, shut up, eat your food. No. You bring them into the circle. You bring them into the circle and you talk to them like people. And guess what? They'll be more prone to participate. They'll be more prone when they understand that they're respected too, as your wife, when she understands that she's respected too, or you, the husband, when you're respected too, and you're just not all whipped and beaten down, and you got to listen to everything that she says. There's a statement that says, what do you do in order to have a happy marriage? You say, yes, dear. No, you don't. No, you don't. You don't say yes, dear, all the time. Now, there are times when you say yes, dear, without a doubt. But there is opportunity and times when she should say yes, sir. because it's reciprocal. It's mutual. It should be that way. And you win some, you lose some. And as they say, you pick your battles. And you don't fight over every little thing. Sometimes it's much easier just to give to one another in these ways to afford each other the peace, tranquility, and happiness. And what were we talking about last week? 3 little letters, very important, a 3-letter word, joy. Joy. Marriages should have joy. They should be a happy environment, a nurturing environment, an environment where children can grow up balanced with good perspectives and good outlooks, non-judgmental, non-condemning, non-prejudicial, non-bias, all-inclusive in this respect of one another, so that those environments can produce balanced personalities, personalities that are built on love and care and concern for others, because they learned it at home as they saw mom and dad manifest their love toward each other, and the love toward them, and the respect toward them, and the respect for mom and dad. It all builds on it if it's done right. And sometimes if it's done right, it's actually automatic. It's just a natural for it to be an outgrowth of that. But sadly, Satan, the devil, as I pointed out in the beginning in part 1, does not want our marriages to succeed, brethren. He knows, he hates the institution for what it stands for. We went through that, and what it stands for, and he wants to take it down. He wants to take an old 20-pound sledgehammer to every one of your marriages and just smash the daylights out of it for one reason or another, because he hates the representation of the institution. Why? Simply said, because it represents his spiritual relationship with his church. And Satan, the devil, does not respect that. And he does walk this earth along with his minions. 1/3 of the whole holy host went with him, according to Revelation chapter 12. And they are on this planet walking among us as aliens. People get all Twitter-pated over this idea that there are aliens among us. Well, yeah, there are aliens among us, but they're not from this dimension. They're from another dimension, and they walk among us, and they do wreak havoc among us, whether it be transmitting and transmitting their attitudes through emotions and so forth. And I don't want to digress into this, but my point is our marriages are vulnerable in these areas that I pointed out a few, whereby these emotions and attitudes and moods and thoughts access into these things, twist their way around, and first thing you know, we're at each other's throats, children included. So we have to be careful of these things. We have to really be on our toes. We have to be on our game, as they would say. And that leads me into point 3. As we keep this in mind, keep this as a platform, do not be filled with strife or self-conceited in your marriage. Just simply look out for the best of the greater whole, which means outside of yourself, consider your mate, if that's all you have at this time, or consider your mate and children, if that's where you're at in your marriage. But the point of it is, in that respect, is that you have to, as it says here, esteem the other better than themselves, and that is the challenge, whether it be in any relationship for that matter. You learn that in the military, by the way. You learn that in the military. You learn that in team sports, by the way. It's not about your records of how many home runs you can get. It's about winning the game together. 9 guys on the field if you're playing baseball, 11 guys if it's football, 5 guys if it's basketball, so forth and so on. That's why team sports are good, healthy environments for people, girls and boys, to learn selflessness. And marriage demands it. Marriage demands selflessness. And it demands, in point 3, it portrayed in this way. And that way is in a positive manner. We must be a positive example to our family, everyone included. And what is the template for that? Well, over here. I told you we'd get back to it. Let's go to Ephesians chapter 5, because we want to go through this, and I'm going to take a bit of time here going line upon line in this section, because this really lays out a template. It lays out a format. It lays out an approach that if you want good results guaranteed, assured, perhaps to your advantage to have good results, this is the template to follow, ladies. This is the template to follow, guys. This is the template, basically, fundamentally. If you want good results that hopefully will generate happy kids, then mom, dad, husbands, wives, understand how to figure out how this applies to your particular specific situation with your one wife and your one husband and your multiple children or single child. This is important. Here it is, verse 22, chapter 5, book of Ephesians. Wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands as unto Jesus Christ. Oh. For the husband, like it or not, ladies, is the head of the wife, even as Christ. Get the association here. Get the association. Think deeply about this. Wives, submit yourself to your husbands as to the Lord, and even as Christ, this is the comparison, is the head of the church, and he's the Savior of the body. Therefore, as the church, this is the association, now the barometer, this is the connection, this is the reflection, this is the example. Think this through. Therefore, as the church is subject to Christ, so let wives be to their own husbands in everything. Now, the guys don't get off on the easy case here. They don't get a card here to pass. Husbands, next verse. Love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it. Meaning, get a job if you don't have a job. Support your family. The burden of providing for the family, like it or not, first and foremost, falls on the guy. I remember one time I was counseling a couple for marriage, and I always do this on occasion. I will ask either the bride-to-be or the husband-to-be, is there anything you really want me, privately, I will ask them one-on-one, anything you want me to ask them, in lieu of the fact that sometimes, and I've often found this out, they don't talk about the hard questions. They don't talk about the hard issues. They don't really address the things they want to address because, well, he'll grow out of it. Or, like I was mentioning to you, I'll change him. Well, maybe you could use an arbitrator. That's what I'm here for. Arbitrate. Let's sit down and talk. I'll ask him. And so I did. She said, ask him why he has such a hard time holding down jobs. So I got him in. And I said, do you love her? I'll say, do you love Susie? Yeah, I love her. Are you sure? He said, oh, Mr. Watson, there isn't anything I wouldn't do for that girl. I would give myself for her. I would do anything for her, anything. I said, well, how about getting a job? How about getting a job? He was stunned. He was stunned. He didn't know what to say. And then I proceeded to ask him, why is it hard for you to hold down jobs? What's your problem? Take me through some of the situations on your last couple of jobs. What happened? And all of a sudden, it's everybody else's fault. And that's what you learn. It's always someone else's fault. But somehow it always follows him. So did you ever think that maybe it's you, since you can't seem to get away from this? You know, and he was young. And sadly, they got married. I didn't marry him. I decided not to. It's my prerogative. And a couple of years later, we're divorced. But that's the way it goes, you see. Brethren, it's so very, very important that we do, men, give ourselves to our ladies, our wives. Verse 26, that he might sanctify and cleanse it with the washing of the water by the word, that he might present it himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that it should be holy and without blemish. And I've often noticed as well throughout the course of my lifetime, not just even in ministry, even in my business associations, going to parties with the associates that I worked with, my colleagues and so on, where you see the women that perhaps are not as dressed well as the men. The men are not spending the money on their wives, especially if the wife is not working and she's at home. And it's a sad situation where a man would not take care of his wife in this respect and be concerned about how she looks. I know you guys don't wear high heels, but it's important that she gets the high heels that she wants. You know what I'm saying? It's important that you care for your children, your boys and your girls, and you don't dress up your boys like girls, which parents are doing this now. Parents are actually dressing up, especially wives. I don't want to pick on the ladies, but a lot of the ladies think their little boys look cute in dresses. And a lot of this is contributing to a lot of this. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying all of it is. But I'm saying it's part of the mix. It's part of the ingredients that is advancing and promoting and propagating this whole transgender movement, where you have a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old making decisions about what gender they are to be, when they're not in any way, shape, or form prepared mentally, emotionally to evaluate that. I mean, like I said before, if you would have asked me when I was 8 years old, Billy, do you like girls? I would have told you no. 8 years old, I didn't care about girls at 8. I cared about baseball. I cared about tag with my buddies. I cared about running around in the woods and getting muddy and jumping in the creek. And we had this rope. 8 years old, all of us would go down in the woods. We would go down this rope and drop into this dirty creek. That's what we did, you know. But I mean, that was me at 8 years old. If they would have said, do you like girls? No. Well, are they good for anything? Yeah, teasing, pulling their hair, you know, doing things like that, you know. Today, oh, he's going to be a homosexual. Or, well, maybe he's a transsexual. I mean, come on. Guide our young people. You don't buy boys little dolls. Now, that may not be politically correct, but you don't do that. You don't promote a femininity to your little boys or your little girls. You keep them on track until they become of age. And hopefully, when they become of age, there's no confusion because the biology is clear. But sadly, our society today is very, very mushy in these areas. And all-inclusive has come to mean something completely foreign to what your Bible portrays as all-inclusive. So ought men, verse 28, to love their wives as their own bodies. He that loves his wife, guys, you that love your wife, you don't beat her, you don't yell at her, you don't drive her into the dirt, you don't disrespect her, you don't do things that would cause her self-esteem to go into the toilet. She's not something to just beat up on. No, not at all. It says here in verse 28, love your wives, one who loves his wife loves himself. You do that, guess what? You know who's really suffering from low self-esteem? You. That's who's suffering from the self-esteem. You beat up on your wife, there's no excuse. No excuse for that. All that does is tell me there's something wrong with you. And you need to recognize that, you know. You need to recognize that. It goes on here, verse 29. He says, for no man ever hated his own flesh, but he nourishes it, cherishes it, even as the Lord the church. Notice the association. How does Christ handle the church? This is the reflection. This is the example. This is what we're looking at as the template to make the determination on how we should interact in our interpersonal relationship with each other. And Paul here in Ephesians to the group there is using the church as the example template. He says here, for no man ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes, cherishes, even as the Lord the church. Verse 30 now, for we are members of his body, of his flesh, and of his bone. For this cause. For what cause? For the cause of leaving for a woman. A man shall leave his father and mother and shall be joined unto the female. The male shall be joined unto the female. I don't know what's so hard about understanding this equation. And the two of them shall be one flesh. And we get the physical imagery of that as well as the spiritual imagery of that, if indeed we're doing it right. If indeed emotionally, mentally, we are in fact merging our ideas and minds and ways of thinking and styles of thinking and modes of thinking and the trajectory of how we process information, we begin to get to each other a merged environment, a merged motif, an ambience in your home. You walk into a house, there's an ambience, there's an atmosphere. They call it atmosphere. I walk in, even a congregation, we're a family, we're a church community, we're a family. People come in here, there's an atmosphere. What's the atmosphere made up of? You and me, our personalities, how we act with one another, interact. Are we friendly? Are we warm? Are we engaging? Are we affectionate? Do we take care of each other? Do we help each other around? All of this is part of the building of that ambience, the building of that atmosphere. And you can transmit or transpose that into any kind of block of community you want to think of. They call it culture. Oh, that's a corporate culture. IBM's got a culture, right? General Motors got a culture. When you come into my company, when I had running my company, wastewater treatment, water treatment and waste systems, I forgot the name of it, water treatment and waste systems, and you walked into my building, there was an atmosphere, there was a environment of how that company was being run, the way it looked. Was it messy? Was it dirty? Was it organized? When you walked in the lobby, that's important. What's on the walls? All those kinds of things. That builds on the environment and the atmosphere. Our marriages, brethren, should portray atmosphere of peace, atmosphere of communication, because that's what, remember, all of these have in common. Because all of this is made possible by how we communicate. Communicate is critical to the overriding successes of all these points that I'm talking with. If there's any commonality among anything that these points have, it's the art of communication. It's the ability to put your words together and to describe your feelings and your emotions. I'm telling you, Margie, you offended me. Oh? Yeah, I'm offended. Or I don't even tell her she offended me, and I just mope around for day after day after day after day after day. When in fact the Bible says the offended should go to the offender. And if the offended doesn't go to the offender, then there's no problem, because how can the offender read your mind? He can't. So if you're offended, man, have the courage and the guts to go to your mate or your child. Talk to them. Bring them out. Son, you really did a bad thing. And you didn't even apologize to your mother. Now let me explain to you what apology means. And you teach them, because he's only 4 years old, or he's only 5 years old, so that when he's 6 and 7, he's not a brat or an out-of-control animal that disrespects everything, yells and screams. And did you ever see that in a store? They want something, and the mother's, she's all embarrassed, and the father's all embarrassed because you embarrassed me when we're in the store. Well, you should feel that way at home. You should feel that way at home, not in the store. Because if you do that at home and nip it in the bud there, guess what? It won't happen in the store. It won't happen. It's easy. It's so, the equation, the formula. But guess what? Parents aren't parenting. Child rearing is in the rears. It's MIA, as they would say, in many respects. And families just think kids are going to grow up naturally nice. Well, look at our cities today and how many young people are out there on the streets sucker punching old ladies at 60 and 70 years old. And I ask myself, and I can't help but not to ask myself, where are the parents? Where are the parents of these young people? They're in their 20s. They're not much farther beyond their teens. And they're all on the streets burning down buildings. And I'll have more to say a little bit about that in the Missing in Action News later on, about at least one story that I want to share with all of you today. But my point that I want to make is that we have to be very positive in our example and engaged in our marriage. And as pointed out here in verse 31, he says, "For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, joined unto his wife, the two shall be one flesh. This is a great mystery." Now, I remember back in part 1, I said this was a great mystery. These preceding verses, Paul says it's a great mystery, and I kind of injected here, what is so mysterious about a husband and wife getting along? Well, that's not what Paul's been talking about. Even though Paul's been using this as an example to reflect, that is, the relationship of a husband and wife together to reflect what his point is, the fact of it was, he's been talking all along, and let him say it right here. He says, "For this is a great mystery, but I speak," this is the mystery, "I speak concerning Christ and his church." Oh, now I get it. So all of that was nothing more than an example of what is underscoring marriage. And marriage actually should reflect the same posturing, the same association, the same relationship, the same manifested caring of Christ and his church. Now I've got some clarity about what my marriage ought to look like. And when I compare Christ, do a side-by-side like wine tasting, you know, Christ and the church and my marriage, how does it taste? How's the finish? How's the start, you know? How does it lay on the palate? Is it sweet? Is it sour? Is it, you know, I got some work to do over here, kind of a thing. And brethren, it's important we put the spotlight on these things, because in order to do that, it brings me to the next point, point 4. By being a positive example, it demands us to communicate in a particular style. Remember I said what underscores all of these points is communication. But you can't just communicate, because communication can be what you could say exemplified in many ways. There's body language, there's words, there's tones. "I love you! You burnt the breakfast again, but I love it!" That doesn't seem to work. I don't really love it. You see, you understand, you know people by what they do, not what they say. Saying, how you say it, body language, all has value in the communicative art. The art of communication is very, very important, very important. I remember one year long ago in 98, maybe 97, back in Panama City Beach, where I gave a presentation to the youth there on communications. And it was verbal communication. My subject was verbal communication and physical communication. And I had it set up where I had these two teenagers, because I knew their father and I knew them very well, playing volleyball and all that. And back then, we were all pretty tight and all on the same page. And I told these two guys that I was going to ask them some things. And when I did, I wanted them to do some body language gestures to me to give a shock value to all the kids. That I had about 100 kids in the class. I had about 100 children, teenagers basically, in the class. So when I said, and I'll just say, "Hey, Keith, turn the lights out." Or turn the lights on, and would you just turn on? And he did a gesture. And everybody was real loud, you know, and I was going to say, "Hey, everybody, you know, we got to get started here. Keith, will you just shut the door?" And he turned around, he said, "You know what I'm doing?" And everybody, it got as quiet as a mouse. I mean, you could have dropped a pen. They looked at him and said, and I said, "Paul, tell your brother, go tell your dad right now about Keith, what he did there. Go get your dad." And he said, "No." And everybody looked and said, what are they doing? Because they were brothers, they were brothers. And all of a sudden I said, you've just had a lesson in body language. And that's communication. And it got everybody's attention. And so communication's important. And here's the form of communication you want to use in your marriage. Point four, communicate with care and love in your mind. We're in the book of Ephesians. Turn over one chapter to chapter 4. Over here and in verse 15 we read this. But speaking the truth in love may grow up into him in all things, which is the head, even Christ. And I realize I'm pulling this out of context, and some would accuse me of proof texting, but the principle stands. It does not dismiss the principle. The principle stands in that we should be sincere, but speaking in sincerity. That's what that Greek word means. Speaking the truth, speaking in sincerity. Now, I may be mad, so it's good that I express my disappointment in whatever I'm dealing with, whether it be with my child or whether it be dealing with my mate. So I'm sincere about this. You shouldn't have driven the car into the house. I'm sincere about it. You really destroyed the car. How did you do that? You're only 10. Where'd you get the keys from? Well, Mom gave them to me. Mom gave them to you? Yeah, well, didn't she tell you not to put them in the ignition? No. On and on you go. You see, communicate, and you get to the bottom of this. You bring it out. You talk. And through the exercise of the situation, guess what? Hopefully, your child comes out on the other side more knowledgeable about that car and what makes it run. And take opportunity to teach them responsibility and to listen to Mom. And even though she didn't tell him to put the keys in the ignition, the obvious assumption was she never thought you were going to do that. So don't go trying to deflect to your mom the responsibility that it's her fault. You see, because that's how that works. That's how that works. So these are communication techniques that we have to be patient enough, brethren, to involve ourselves with, because being sincere and in love, agape, that's the word, love, may grow up into him in all things, which is the head, even Christ. Because frankly, if indeed we continue to communicate without agape, and we're doing it now out of hate, disappointment, and dislike, we run into a problem, brethren. You'll never reach the heart of the situation and its condition that you're trying to address. You'll never make that connection, because remember this, once an individual goes defensive on you, when they go defensive on you, you've lost them. You've lost them. You've got to keep on the offense. And what I mean by that is reason with each other, talk with each other, engage neutrally with each other. That's important that you do that, so that you don't, through insulting, belittling, demanding, embarrassing, penalizing, that does nothing for the relationship. As a matter of fact, that will cause the relationship to go into areas that sadly will minimize the potential. When in fact you married the girl, you married the boy, did you not in the beginning? You loved them, you married them for what? To be put in a box and to minimize your personal potential? No. You married them in hopes that they would make you a better person. Right? Should be. Otherwise, stay single. Stay single. Why would you involve somebody in your life if you don't think they can bring anything to you for your own benefit, as well as theirs? Because again, remember, it's a mutual understanding. It's a mutual agreement. I do. When you say I do, that means you both, at least at the start, have mutually agreed to the fact that you love one another, and that you think each other can maximize you into becoming something even better than what you are by yourself. That's important to recognize. So marriage has a way of doing that, and it's very important that if indeed that's going to be accomplished, it's going to only be accomplished, brethren, if you have agape in your heart, if you have love in your heart. 1 Corinthians 13, it'd be remiss of me not to reference this chapter in the book of Corinthians, the love chapter, known for the content. I always try to keep this in a marriage ceremony as much as possible, and always ask the bride and the groom if it can be plugged in somewhere, if they indeed have certain ideas of how they want the vows to be taken. I always try to include this in the process because it is very fundamental to the platform of what a marriage should be established on. And here in 1 Corinthians 13, and I'll just quote verse 4, charity, that is agape, love, affectionate love, that's what this means. And I like the word charity because charity invokes, it essentially implies active. It implies proactive giving without the expectation of receiving. That's important. That's important for you to understand. In a marriage, you give not to get. We've heard that so many times over the years in God's church, but it's true. It's a truism of life. You give not to get, especially in marriage, in the context that we're talking about. You give because as Christ gives to His church, you are more concerned about them, be they children or mate, them than yourself, as was pointed out in Philippians chapter 2, verse 3 that we read, not through self-conceit, but that you care for them better than yourself. And these are hard attributes, very hard attributes to accomplish and to achieve. They are certainly things to aspire to, but are indeed things that do, in fact, if we're successful in engaging them and executing them, pretty much guaranteed we will have a good, solid, healthy marriage for the long run. But here in verse 4, again, going back, charity suffers long and is kind. Charity envies not. Charity vaunts not itself. It's not puffed up. In other words, marriage is not about you. It's not about what you can get. It's not about what it can serve you in helping you to be better than the mate. It's not a competition even within the mate. You have a lot of that today, especially with both husband and wife working outside the home. And especially in lieu of the fact that sometimes the ladies make more money than the men, or vice versa. Now, some men don't mind that, you know, and they can adjust to that kind of a thing, and that's fine. That's fine, because in some cases those kinds of circumstances work very well, as long as there's respect as part of the relationship, that the mutual respect is not lost, and that the one's success over the others is used over the head of the less successful to beat her or him down. That's wrong. That's wrong. You'll never maximize your relationship in that regard. It'll become a competition. It'll become an environment that just ruins the self-esteem of the other. And it doesn't work at all. And so this is important, that we communicate with care and with love in our hearts. This is very important in that respect, because a good, healthy marriage does indeed work with that as a fundamental premise to its operation. There's a good book written by a couple of authors, a husband and wife team, Leonard and Natalie Zunnan. And it's called The 4-Minute Rule. I think the book is called The 4-Minute Rule. And it's kind of an interesting book, but it's based on a very simple, fundamental behavioral technique. And that is essentially that when you get up in the morning, the first 4 minutes when you're up in the morning together, has a big bearing on how you're going to behave toward one another throughout the day. So in order to avoid unnecessary arguments or mood swings, the 4-minute rule is encouraged, and they, through the book, give you ideas on how to make that 4 minutes some of the most pleasant minutes of the day to assure each mate and even the children on how to go ahead and assure yourself of a good day with each other. And the 4-minute rule is then revisited when one returns. The husband goes off to work and comes home, or the two go off to work and they come home. When they get reunited in the evening, 4-minute rule again kicks in, kicks in. And once more, the first 4 minutes that you reunite with each other are indeed intensely viewed as activity that hopefully will reassure the evening to be a positive evening, maybe even with a little romance to do, But the point of it is that the 4 minutes there in the relationship are very important on how you essentially express yourself, be it in attitude, be it in your mood, be it in, again, the tone of voice, and taking opportunity and time to listen to one another. You had a hard day, she's had a hard day, and so the point of it is both of you had a hard day, so somebody maybe wants to talk about the hard day they had, so let them talk, even if it takes a half hour. Suffer long. What does that mean? That means to be patient, to be long-suffering with each other, and try to work through some of these things. And sometimes it does take patience, to work through an issue that we might be confronted with from time to time in our relationship. So do take the time to listen to one another, because that is very, very important. Now, last point, very important. We've got 5 points. This is the last one. This is really important, brethren. And all of us struggle with this, including yours truly. But nevertheless, we really need to do this. If indeed we get into the habit of doing it, it will help solidify, guaranteed, it will help solidify your relationship with your mate and with your children, and will be very beneficial. Extremely. I cannot tell you how extremely beneficial this last step is. I'm going to give you just 10 seconds to think about where I'm going with this. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. All right, you done? You think you know where I'm going? Pray together. Pray together. Why is that important? Because praying together gives you opportunity to be humble, for sure. Why? Because you're in the presence of God. You spiritually are on the sea of glass. Spiritually speaking, you are kneeling before Jesus Christ on the right hand of the Father. You are spirit to spirit. You are in the Holy of Holies. You're in the presence of 24 elders. You're in the presence of the cherubs and seraphim. You're in the presence of the holy angels. Michael and Gabriel are probably there in the audience as you're kneeling before God with your mate, or maybe with your children also. But I suggest also that you and your mate have private time. There's good, certainly, benefit to having family prayer with the children included. But it's very important that you and your mate use prayer to solidify your relationship with each other. And how do you do that? Well, you go about simply, basically volunteering your appreciation of your mate, of course, bringing things out, talking about maybe even problems that the two of you are contending with. Maybe it's a health issue. You know what it would mean for your mate to hear you bring your name before God to ask God for you to be healed? Or to pray and hear the expression of appreciation that you are sacrificing yourself every day to go to work, to do what you do, and to thank you for the mate that you have, my wife, my husband, whatever. That is so, I'm telling you, brethren, so inspiring for the one who's listening to hear the other express the appreciation, the thankfulness, the gratitude, the insightful insight of things that they might appreciate. I've often said I really enjoy, in light of the fact that I'm not a cook. I mean, if I was a single guy, I'd be living on Raisin Bran, hot dogs, and bologna, you know. All beef, by the way. But you know, there isn't a time, oftentimes, when I won't appreciate and express my appreciation for Margie's cooking, because she is such a good cook in so many respects. I always kid her that, you know, it's Margie's kitchen, because she cooks so much and so well in the things that she participates in cooking. But I'm just saying that these are things that all of us need to understand do wonders for our marriage. Do wonders for our marriage. And family prayer with the children as well can be very educational exercises, because it gives you opportunity maybe even to bring, just like you could for your mate as well, but nevertheless, keeping in point here and keeping on point, allowing yourself to bring up issues with your children, to bring to their attention about things that you recognize in them that maybe they didn't think you did, but now they know you know. And so the cat's out of the bag, and guess what? Sometimes relationships change in those areas, because the mystery of what they thought was a mystery isn't a mystery at all. My point is that let your feelings be known openly and transparently. And that's important, because so often during the day and in our fast-paced lifestyles, where we're going here and there, hither and yon, as they would say, don't take the time. We don't take the time to express our likes and our dislikes, our appreciation, gratitude for the things that our mates and our children bring to the table. So take time. Take time. Pray with one another. 5 points. In summary, 100% in. You got to be 100% in. You need to respect your spouse and your children. That's point 2. Point 3, be a positive example. Be a positive example. Point 4, communicate. Communicate with care and love. The style of communication's important, but the style, the mode, the approach is so critical. You've got to do it with care and love. With care and love. And of course, it goes without saying, sincerity as well. And then, of course, point 5, to pray together. So, brethren, keep these things in mind. And in closing, let's go back to 1 Corinthians chapter 13, because I want to pick up on where I left off. So important, these points are remembered. And if ever we get into issues, roadblocks, obstacles that seem to be unmovable in the relationships that we have with our mates and or with our children, go back to 1 Corinthians 13, reread it, take some time out. You know, as they say, go and count to 10. Well, when you're counting to 10, read 1 Corinthians 13 and put things back in perspective. There's nothing worth allowing your marriages to go on the rocks if indeed you are a Christian and you are engaged in making sure that the relationship of your marriages are indeed geared toward and aspiring for maximizing each other's personalities and capabilities, gifts and talents. Very important. Never give up. Never give up on your marriages, brethren. Do the best you can to keep them on the rails. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 4, let me reiterate. Charity suffers long and is kind. Charity envies not. Charity vaunts not itself, is not puffed up. And this charity is agape. It is affectionate love. It is caring love where you have affection. Verse 5, does not behave itself unseemingly, seeks not her own, is not easily provoked, and thinks no evil. Rejoice, is not in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. We're going to get through this, even though my son's an addict. We're going to circle the wagons, honey, and we're going to do this, even though my daughter is on the streets and I know not where she is. We're going to do this. We're going to do this, even though my son or my wife attempted to take her own life. We're going to get through this, you see. And these are things that are happening in the lives of people, brother. Paul says, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Charity, agape, brethren, agape never fails. Never does, as long as we don't give up on it. So, brethren, really do take some time. Appreciate your marriages. Use them to maximize each other's joy. Joy. Be happy. As they say in Jamaica, Irie, be happy. Be happy. Enjoy your lives together. Enjoy your children. Appreciate the relationship and insight that God has given you to know the keys in making it successful, and then implement them in your life.